Okay, the last day's warning to LDS Mormons from one of your own before April General Conference 2018, Part 6. Instead of reviewing on this video the previous lectures, I'm just going to continue where I left off from the last one, and it is a summary of what Brigham Young is known to be responsible for. He had Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith murdered in order that he could become the president of the church. He arranged with the Warsaw Lodge to murder them. That was the mob. But when they didn't do it, he had plants on the inside, Willard Richards and John Taylor, who were the backup plan when Joseph Smith got the 6-shooter on top of my third great-grandfather's single-shot pistol. He was in Nauvoo rather than on the East Coast, trying to promote Joseph Smith for the President of the United States. He took over the presidency of the Traveling 12 in 1838 by Thomas B. Marsh's upset frustration over the Danite organization, whom Brigham Young had converted and brought into the church. He excommunicated Thomas B. Marsh, and Joseph Smith did not do it. And so he rose to the position of president of the Traveling 12 by wrongly excommunicating Thomas B. Marsh. And so it was the Standing 12 that should have played a role in becoming the president of the church, but Brigham Young was able to talk other people out of it. Using Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, to mean that the Traveling 12 had governing authority, not just traveling religious authority. Brigham Young had William Smith, the younger brother of Joseph Smith, excommunicated after he murdered Joseph Smith and Hiram. William Smith was accused that he was anti-polygamist, and it's interesting because William Smith, the month before, had given a talk with John Taylor present, defending the idea of polygamy. His talk can be found online. What needs to be pointed out with polygamy is that when the Smiths lived in Vermont, that's where Joseph was born, and while in Vermont, Smith Sr. was a part of the New Israelites, a religious sect there in Vermont. Oliver Cowdery's father also lived there in Vermont. They were relatives through Lucy Mack, and they both attended the church, and the church taught and practiced among some polygamy in that early church before the LDS Church. And so the Smith family were very well aware of polygamy, but there's no record that Joseph Smith Sr. practiced polygamy. There is record that Joseph Smith Sr. was a master rodsman, an expert rodsman, because the New Israelites were involved with using divining rods to find treasure. That's where the treasure seeking comes from. And later it would be used as a cover as they were digging up bodies to give to the doctor at the university so he can do study and analysis on the human body. But that's where the section in the Doctrine and Covenants talks about the rod of Aaron, which in the Book of Commandments was not the rod of Aaron. It was given a different name. So look it up, research it, find out for yourselves. But that's where it comes from. Oliver Cowdery was taught by his father, who learned it from the New Israelites. And Joseph Smith used stones instead of rods. He was taught by his father, who was a master rodsman. So knowing about polygamy, it's interesting that early on it was not practiced in the church. In fact, in the Book of Commandments, there was a commandment for marriage for one man, one woman. The Book of Mormon also has the passage in Jacob that says that Lehi gave commandment that there should be only one man and one woman in the marriage, unless circumstances require otherwise. And obviously, if you're the last people on earth, male and female, or the first people on earth, male and female, your children will of necessity have to breed. So those are the only exceptions where polygamy would be necessary if your children, the women outnumbered the men. So yeah, for human survival is the only reason to practice polygamy. You could make an argument for an overpopulation of women to men ratio to allow all women to experience a marriage relationship. There's still going to be your problems that will result naturally from that situation. As the HBO TV show Big Love points out. But they weren't practicing it as indicated in Section 132 anyway. The Mormons under Brigham Young weren't practicing it according to Section 132. There's what's identified as the Law of Sarah, and that indicates something different than a man desiring 10 virgins. So there's a contradiction in that section as to how polygamy is supposed to actually work. But it seems clear that Joseph Smith, though he knew of the practice, never practiced it and taught against it. There are few women who later spoke out, claiming that they were married to Joseph Smith, had sexual relations with Joseph Smith, and had children with Joseph Smith. With the discovery of DNA research, all of those claims have been proven false. So all of those women who claim to have had a child line through Joseph were lying. the DNA shows that the child belonged to the woman's original husband. In regards to the 14-year-olds and the 17-year-old, they never got pregnant. And you got to understand, they didn't have birth control back then. Birth control is a modern invention. After, I think after World War II, contraceptive pills were first invented before condoms. Yeah, contraception was not available in Joseph Smith's time frame. And so if you're going to have sex on a regular basis with people, you are guaranteed that they're going to get pregnant. And so that throws that into question as well, especially when we identify that the children claimed to be from Joseph Smith are not from Joseph Smith, but from their actual father. And then you have one lady who claims in her journal that Joseph Smith came to her, asked her to be his wife, and they had sexual relations, and she goes on to describe it in her journal. But with all the other things in question, this also seems out of question. When you realize what Brigham Young has done, Brigham Young is the one who took credit for instigating polygamy. He says that while he was on his mission in England, he got the idea for polygamy. So he took credit for it. And since he is the one that had polygamy in Utah, it seems very clear that there was an underground polygamous movement in the church that was in violation of the revelation that Joseph Smith had given. Section 132 was put in later on, I believe in 1856. That's 12 years after Joseph died, and it was Brigham Young putting it in there. And so it seems very likely that, along with the other scriptures that Brigham Young added later on, that Brigham Young is the one who did the cover-up smear campaign to say it was Joseph Smith who instigated it, even though he had made the claim, and it's documented, that he took credit for it. And you can easily see that you have a woman and she wants to be taken care of, because back then women needed a man to support them. That's just the way society was back then. The women's rights movement, wasn't for another 100 years later. Back in those days, women were dependent upon a man for their survival. And when you have a woman who is being threatened by Brigham Young to say, you better write in your journal that Joseph Smith came to you, are you going to rebel and say, no, I will not shame the prophet? Okay, well then you don't get the support that you want, and you don't get to come to Utah with us, and so What does the woman do? She gives in and writes in her journal the experience. I can easily see that happening. William Clayton was supposedly the one who said that he had heard in a meeting that Joseph Smith was instigating polygamy, but not until 1843. So, wait a minute. If it was practiced earlier, why 1843 when everything starts hitting the fan? And so there's some real questions that need to be answered. But it appears that William Clayton, again, was also under pressure that he needed to defend his plural wives situation. He had 9, and 3 of them ended up leaving him. So if you're practicing polygamy illegally or immorally in violation of church law, and then the leader of the church is taken out and the new leader of the church is one in favor of polygamy, how do you cover it up so that you can continue your polygamous lifestyle? Brigham Young didn't come out and say, I'm now practicing polygamy. Why would he do that? He would have to say, it was Joseph Smith, he's been practicing it all along. He even had 24 wives, see? And, you provide him a list. And my third great aunt, the sister of John Solomon Fulmer, Desdemona Fulmer, is listed as one of his wives, but she never bore Joseph Smith's child, and in fact she was not added until after Joseph Smith's death. I don't even think she knew about it, or if she did, it was under the belief that, I get to be married to Joseph Smith now that he's dead. He was the founder of the church. Wow, what a great honor. So, there's those situations. But without actual evidence that Joseph Smith had more than one wife other than Emma, everything else is thrown into question because it's not actual evidence. Just because somebody writes something in their journal, just because somebody writes something as minutes after the fact, just because people claim that their children are his, that's not evidence. Evidence is in the DNA. Evidence is in the documents, in the recordings, and nowadays we can produce evidence far better than we could back in those days. And Brigham Young had ordered Willard Richards to edit all the documents and Joseph Smith's church history. That's being borne out by more modern research, as we see that the Joseph Smith papers are a bit different than the history of the church. And but what I don't like about the Joseph Smith papers is, one, they're charging $100 a book. I mean, come on, how is anybody going to afford that to find out what's going on? And then secondly, you have BYU apologists explaining the documents rather than just publishing them and letting us find out for ourselves, rather than listening to somebody else's BS. trying to apologize for what they're finding out. So, yeah, until we can actually get somebody to do a comparison between the Joseph Smith papers and the history of the church to find out what was added, what was changed, what was deleted, we're not going to be able to know. And with the Joseph Smith papers, if they were actually written by Joseph Smith, we now have first-hand evidence of Joseph Smith's handwriting and linguistic style. We can then use that on the Book of Mormon. We can then use that in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, and the church history. We can identify what is actually Joseph Smith's linguistic pattern. It's well known now that Brigham Young was making changes in church history, covering things up, blaming Joseph Smith for things that he never had instigated. The Danites, Joseph Smith was accused by people of being in charge of the Danites. It was Brigham Young. And polygamy, Brigham Young. So, Brigham Young had to solidify his authority in the eyes of the people. And you can't do that by saying that Joseph Smith was wrong and fallen. You have to do it by subtle means and framing somebody who cannot defend themselves because they're dead. And then I think we'll talk about what Brigham Young did while he was president in the next segment. Okay, while Brigham Young was president of the church in Utah, he took away the priesthood from women that was given to the Relief Society sisters in their first meeting on 17th of March. And he took away the priesthood from the blacks. There are people that say, well, there were blacks under Joseph Smith, but Brigham Young was the one that banned it. It may have gone underground, but Brigham Young banned it. I already talked about the forcing of confessions to implicate Joseph Smith for polygamy. But it was Brigham Young who established polygamy. First as an underground movement, and then as a commonplace practice. Brigham Young added Doctrine and Covenants sections, attributing them to Joseph Smith, including section 132. The Book of Commandments, like I mentioned, was one man, one woman. Brigham Young changed the nature and character of God, just like Constantine did with his Trinity God, Homoousios. And it's popularly known as the Adam God doctrine. Brigham Young confirmed that that's what he said because he put it in the temple text that he wrote out. He had spoken of it from the pulpit during conference on numerous occasions, and even said there have been a lot of people rumoring that I had said this, and I want to state for the record I did say it. That is what I meant. So it's very clear Brigham Young had the Adam-God doctrine, and he even argued with Orson Hyde and Orson Pratt concerning the issue. Both of them opposed the Adam-God doctrine, and because they opposed the president of the church, Brigham Young then changed the order of the Quorum of the 12. Excuse me. And as a result of that change, Orson Hyde, who would have been the successor because of the excommunication of William Smith, he was bumped down in order, and Orson Pratt was also bumped down in order, and that put John Taylor as the president of the 12 to be the successor, and who became the second president of the church. So you have Thomas B. Marsh taken out, who would have been in the position if the people had followed him as the president of the traveling 12 rather than the standing 12. And then you have William Smith excommunicated so that he can't become the successor to Brigham Young. And he puts John Taylor, who was in on the murder of Joseph and Hiram Smith. He then becomes the successor. You have Brigham Young ordering the Mountain Meadows Massacre. The church has never acknowledged that it was Brigham Young. Not too many years ago, they finally confessed that, okay, well, we'll throw the bishop under the bus. The bishop was responsible. Have you ever wondered if he had been excommunicated posthumously? I bet you he hasn't. He should have been, because that was murder, and the church threw him under the bus as the one responsible. But the church would never blame Brigham Young. The church had come out and said, oh yeah, Joseph Smith was a polygamist, we acknowledge that now. But they will not acknowledge what Brigham Young did. They're protecting Brigham Young, not Joseph Smith. So that's troubling. And then you have, by the way, Mountain Meadows Massacre. You'll never guess what date that was on. 9/11. Look it up. Technology is amazing with Google. And then Brigham Young was also involved in the murder of the Indian tribe here in Utah. And there's a fort down there south of the valley that was erected to defend themselves against the Indians because of the murder that they committed against them. And then I've mentioned Brigham Young changed the temple endowment. The temple endowment Joseph Smith came up with did not have the Freemasonry signs, tokens, names, the Adam God theory. That was all done by Brigham Young. Brigham Young made the changes to make the temple ritual just like Freemasonry. And the blood oaths and the penalties, Brigham Young, not Joseph. So it's clear Brigham Young is the usurper of the restored church. Just like in the Egyptian myth or story or prophecy of Osiris being murdered by his brother. And so with section 43 that I had read to you, that a wicked church president has only authority to call his replacement. That then leads us to the question of what document do we have that indicates who Brigham Young chose as his successor. It wasn't his change of the traveling 12, because that was done after this particular document, and so that therefore is not authorized, because that's not the initial choice that Brigham Young made. And so what is that document where Brigham Young names his successor? Well, it's one of the documents that were added into the Doctrine and Covenants, along with Section 132, and that is Section 85. And I'll go there right quick so we can read it specifically, because we'll need to cover several issues with this. William W. Phelps was the bishop in Independence, Missouri, and knowing that Brigham Young added this document as he was president after Joseph Smith had died, even though he attributed it to Joseph Smith, we see that it is manufactured, that this instance never really occurred. And people even admit that it never actually came to pass as prophesied. And so people criticize Joseph Smith, saying, well, he's a false prophet. See, this revelation didn't come to pass. But it's not from Joseph Smith. It's from Brigham Young. And the way it's worded, when you understand that it's Brigham Young that's giving this revelation, it makes a big world of difference. And this was the initial document before Brigham Young made the changes to the 12. So this is his choice for who is to succeed him as the authorized president of the church. And it's therefore not John Taylor, and therefore not the successive presidents that we've had in the church. Instead, we can go to verse 7. And it shall come to pass that I, the Lord God, will send. So this is a future prophecy, not an immediate successor. One mighty and strong, holding the scepter of power in his hand, clothed with light for a covering, whose mouth shall utter words, eternal words, while his bowels shall be a fountain of truth, to set in order the house of God, temple, and to arrange by lot the inheritances of the saints, whose names are found, and the names of their fathers and of their children enrolled in the book of the law of God. Now, that's interesting because a few verses later, he talks about those who have been excommunicated and are not in this book, and therefore do not get an inheritance. Brigham Young was essential in excommunicating lots of the leaders of the church. So you see what he's doing here. This one mighty and strong, he's trying to implicate that it's him. And Brigham Young held both government and religious authority. he was the king and high priest of the church, the kingdom. And so, yes, he became governor when the United States came after Utah and forced them to become part of the Union, and promised that Brigham Young could be the governor of Utah, but then they replaced him with somebody else. Yeah, this is Brigham Young talking about him in this passage. I'll get to a discussion of what each of these indicate for the one that's actually chosen by the Lord, even though Brigham Young is choosing himself to be the successor to Joseph Smith, because Joseph Smith is talked about in verse 8. While that man who was called of God and appointed. Back in 43, Joseph Smith is the one appointed, that putteth forth his hand to steady the ark of God, shall fall by the shaft of death. Gunshot. Like a tree that is smitten by the vivid shaft of lightning. Interesting. The guns back then were bursts of light. So, yeah, Brigham Young is saying that Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet, and that Brigham Young is the new chosen one by God, a mighty and strong one. So humble is he. Okay, so this is the passage that has caused controversy in the early church, because some people recognize that this applied to a future person, and they wondered when he would come. And there were several who, when they got upset with the leaders of the church, would then say, I am the one mighty and strong. So Joseph Fielding Smith Sr., in his presidency, came out with the official first presidency statement on the one mighty and strong. And it's a long document. It's not a page thing. He goes into a full history of apologies concerning the history of William Phelps, and trying to justify that the president of the church would never be the one to fall. This obviously refers to a bishop in the future. Well, there's several problems with that. Bishops, one, do not have government authority. Scepter of power refers to government authority. Two, a bishop does not have temple authority, so he cannot set in order the house of God. So as much as people like to say, well, this refers to William W. Phelps, it doesn't. They just made it seem like it was referring to him, and that this was actually a prophecy. Again, Brigham Young is trying to legitimize his role as being prophetic and called of God. But in reality, what he did was appoint his successor that was approved by God. So the unauthorized leadership of the church right now is to have this one mighty and strong come one day, and he is to have the right to authority of the leadership of the church and the leadership of government when both the government and the religion collapse, which the signs for the collapse of the government and the religion have come and gone, and none of the prophets have made mention of it. So, let's see. We're done with that page then. Okay, so who is the mighty and strong? And to briefly explain, because I've written numerous books about this individual, I've detailed and studied, researched him more than anybody. and I've even posted additional information on my website about who he is. I've even been able to identify his birth date and some of the things that are supposed to happen in his life according to the prophecies. But basically, the one mighty and strong is the man-child of John the Revelator. He is the one born from the church to rule the world and rule the church. He is Horus in the Egyptian mythology, who is the son of Osiris, who was murdered by his brother, and who comes back and battles his brother and takes back the throne that rightly belongs to him, restoring the kingdom and throne of Osiris. And obviously the church has never talked about him. You won't find him in any commentaries, any manuals. It's not discussed in any lessons. It's kept covered up. And of course, when you're the leader of the church and you are corrupt, you don't want to say to other people, yeah, I'm corrupt. So what? Deal with it. No. You cover it up. You say you're righteous. You say that everybody must obey you. You say that you are infallible, that you are the voice of God. And yeah, corruption. And that's what's going on. I've already pointed out all the lists of a corrupt religion and a corrupt leadership. And this, again, once we've established that the church has fallen, has been usurped by a corrupt man, that none of the leadership of the church have authority to lead the church. And that's why there have been no revelations. Let's see. Okay. So next segment will be about what this one mighty and strong man-child Horus is prophesied to do. Okay, now what is this one mighty and strong man-child Horus prophesied to do? We've already read in verse 7 several of the things that he's going to do, but when you do your study and research, you would find connections in other scriptures as well as the ancient Egyptian documents of which he originates from. So again, he was prophesied more than 6,000 years ago, and this is the time of his coming. And according to the sign on the 23rd of September 2017, he emerged from the church to begin the battle, and his birthday would have been between 67 to 73, because that's who Brigham Young or President Benson was talking to as the ones who would be the Royal Army, referring to President David O. McKay concerning those who would restore the Constitution, but not in Washington. And so that's one of the things that this one mighty and strong man-child Horus will do, is restore the Constitution. And he would have been born during that time frame. So what would be the date? I wonder. Let's see. Thomas B. Marsh excommunicated on the 17th of March. The Relief Society was organized on the 17th of March. 17th of March is the celebration of St. Patrick. Who's St. Patrick? Interesting. He's a guy who chased out serpents from Ireland. Do you see the connection? 17th of March, 1970 is right in the middle between 67 and 73. So that is a high likelihood. But nevertheless, what is he going to do? It's not important to know who he is, but to identify him from his works. For by their fruits ye shall know them, not by their birth date, not by their status or claims, but by their fruits. And so he will be one who has an idea for a new constitution. He will be one who has a new idea for a restoration of the government. He will be one for a restoration for the church. He will be one who will have restoration for the temple and the temple text. He will have an idea of the blueprint for the New Jerusalem, for the New Jerusalem temple. He will have plans for the inheritances of those who come to live in New Jerusalem. He will be able to figure out a new system for doing genealogy work, in which excommunicated members will be factored out. Those are just the ones from section 85. Others involve, let's see, what else we got? He'll restore the priesthood organizations, establishing all of the ancient orders. He will teach correct doctrine. He will be able to interpret Scripture correctly. The Jews are looking for a Jewish Messiah in the last days. That's why they ignored Jesus. They were looking for an actual physical Savior, not a spiritual Savior. And so they were looking for someone who was going to release them from their slavery and bondage to the governments of the world and take over the government as the ruler of the world. Jesus failed on that because he was murdered. He was the Osiris character, not the Horus character. The Horus character is who the Jews were looking for. This is the one mighty and strong man-child, Horus, of the latter days. So, despite believing from the Catholic Church that Jesus is going to come a second time, that violates the prophecies. Jesus came, did his work, and now all we have to do is have the temple rituals that will prepare us for the afterlife. And it's Horus who is going to reestablish the true temple rituals. Let's see. He'll have a knowledge of Egyptian and Paleo-Hebrew, because he will correct the Hebrew text of the Bible, because he will have translated the Egyptian version of the Bible and merge the two together into one, correcting the mistranslations and filling in all the missing questions and gaps that are in the Bible. That's why the Jews came up with a Talmud, is because of all the questions left behind in the current Torah that they have, that are missing stories, missing words, missing information. And so the Jews needed to explain that, and that's where they came up with their Talmud. He'll have ideas for a cube city in New Jerusalem. John the Revelator talks about the cube city. So the New Jerusalem is going to be like Noah's Ark. This is where all nations need to go to escape the destruction that will be on the earth. He will have ideas on how to prolong life, and the Jews even indicate resurrection. He'll receive the keys of resurrection. He will change the economy. He will elevate the poor to be equal with the rich. So there is no rich and poor anymore. Everybody will prosper. Okay. So now that you know about all of this that I've spoken, what are you going to do? Have you even hung out after all these hours to listen this far? Are you going to do something about it, or are you just going to sit back and wait to be compelled upon? Are you going to be a Lamanite or a Nephite? Choose ye this day. There's a lot of things that I left undiscussed, that I've told you that you will need to study and research. Much of it I've already published, so you can look up my stuff. They're free on my website, so you don't have to pay for the Kindle version or the printed version on Amazon. But yet, despite telling people it's free on the website, people still are flocking to Amazon to get it. So whatever, why don't you just pay me donations rather than going to Amazon? You can get the material for free, the documents for free, and then just donate $1, but whatever. But the majority of people have been complaining. They attack me as a false prophet, false Christ, false teacher, an apostate, thus fake news, as is popular in common lingo. But I'm not trying to control anybody. I'm warning you. The signs have happened. Nobody looked for the signs. And because nobody looked for the signs, they're going to be cut off. And that means that destruction is coming very soon. 15 May, as I've indicated. You can go to my website to see my explanation on how I came up with that date. And so that's the pattern. People are corrupt. Corrupt people destroy society. And that's what's going to happen. It's not going to be God. It's already planned by this secret Gadianton band. They're known as the Illuminati. They were formed on May 1st, 1776. and I've also written about them and published books about them and tracing their steps, and I post on my website all their documented plans for destruction, and very few people are going to it. I don't understand why, but that's the way it is. I've got time, so we'll go as far as we can here. So, I've listed all of the corruptions of the church, and if you do the math, we've lost 13 million members. That means we only have 3 million. You can pay attention in conference in the second Saturday session where they announce the statistics for last year, and you can do the math from there. The ward buildings in the U.S. and Canada are to have 500 members, and branches and foreign wards have 150 members. So do the math with the statistics that come out. And the wards are built for only 300 people, not 500 people. So there are some places in Utah, yes, where they're overcrowded, but when you spread out outside of Utah, well, not in my ward. My ward lost 300 members within the past few years. I was a ward missionary and involved in finding out who's in our ward, and we found out that 300 members were no longer active. That's just in one ward. And so, yeah, it's a pretty bleak state. And you can read Jeremiah and who he blames when the sheep are scattered. He blames the shepherds. The shepherds are the leaders of the church. And let's see. Leaders, okay, I think. Yeah. So yeah, when the leaders say that they're men and they make mistakes and weaknesses, they have weaknesses. There's a difference between having a natural weakness and being corrupt and evil. Deliberately deceiving the members of the church to cover up church history and denying substance to the poor is not a weakness. That's outright corruption. So, I'm sorry, but I don't buy it. I'm on the last page. That's awesome. So maybe we'll go to the end. Alright, so, are you going to be a Lamanite or a Nephite? That's what I'm trying to get here. I need people to act. It's no fun being the only one building an ark to be the only one to survive. So, I don't even have a wife now. So it's only me. I can't build a new human race with just me. Even though the Egyptians have the god Atum, who self-procreated man and woman. That was metaphoric, not literal. So, unless it goes back to the first Father in heaven, I've come up with that theory. But until we figure things out, that's just a theory. So, let's see. Yeah, I mean, don't be a fence sitter. Don't be a Lamanite. Don't be compelled before you'll act. And so for this conference, I'm not expecting President Nelson or any of the prophets to come out and say, oh, by the way, all of the prophecies in the scriptures were fulfilled. Sorry we forgot to warn you ahead of time, but destruction is imminent and is upon us in the next month. They're not going to do that. So, yeah, I mean, new policies and changes in the way things are run in the church, that's not revelation. You got to understand that the prophets have no revelatory power. They've lost their authority, so they're useless. They are a business corporation, literally a business corporation. Heber J. Grant was the one who filed the amendment of corporation articles, or whatever it's called. The document is in the Utah State Archives, so you can find it online and see for yourself. And then Amos 3:7, as I've alluded to before, it requires prophets to reveal God's secrets. You have to warn the people. The prophets have not warned us. You don't warn people by saying, well, you better pay your tithing or you're going to burn. Or, get a year supply. You never know when it'll happen. Nothing specific on dates, on signs that have occurred or will occur. They've not done that. And General Conference is the place for revelations, and it's not been done. They've kept it all a secret, if they know anything at all, and they obviously don't know anything. And so, yeah, be wary of other apostles and others who give commandments over the pulpit. You'll know instantly that they're out of line and they're in the wrong. And so, yeah, I mean, there are going to be people who, if they even bother to listen and watch all my videos of 7 hours worth, or 6 hours worth, there will be those who will say that I'm the threat to the church and I'm mentally ill, just as my bishop did to me. And Abinadi was not the president of the church. He was a regular citizen who had priesthood authority, apparently, but spoke out against the corruption of the church and government, and was arrested and questioned by the leaders, and he ended up being accused of being a threat to the government and the church, and was accused of being mentally ill, and they murdered him, burned him at the stake. Book of Mormon says faggots, which means burnt sticks. The sticks had fire at the end of them like torches, but not quite torches. But yeah, he died by burning sticks. And see, the Book of Mormon prophets are not the same as Jesus' 12 apostles or 12 disciples when he appeared in the Book of Mormon in 3rd Nephi. So in the Book of Mormon, anybody who had the Melchizedek priesthood was a prophet, as defined in the Book of Mormon. So Samuel the Lamanite was called a prophet merely because Jesus chastised Nephi, saying, "Where are his records? Did I not prophesy to him? Did he not tell you and warn you of my coming?" Yeah, oops, we forgot. Better get that written down. Let's make him a prophet too, so that he looks good. So yeah, you guys have been warned now. You have no excuses. The time is up. The church is still under condemnation for not studying and researching the Book of Mormon, using it to expose the corruption and stop the corruption, take down the corruption. And because nobody has been looking for the signs, they're going to be destroyed. That's what the signs are for. Warning of danger. Amos 3:7. It talks about a lion's roar. It warns you of danger that's nearby. And, I am one who is responsible, as commanded in Scripture, that having been warned, I should warn my neighbor. That's what I'm doing. I have been warned because I have looked for the signs, I have seen the signs, and I'm now warning you that the signs have already happened, having warned previously in advance to the signs happening. Nobody cared to listen, and now it's destruction time. So I'm now warning you of the destruction, because in God's eyes, you're toast, just as previous generations that have failed. And so that's it. That's the end of my lecture that I came up with last night. And if you want more information, again, go to my website, www.travis-wayne-goodsell.weebly.com, and it's all over at the end of my videos, and if I get it to Facebook, I'll get it posted there. But hopefully you'll download it from my website first and foremost, and spread the word, because destruction is coming. That's my warning. And so now you know why I'm doing it before General Conference, so that you can know for yourselves that they are corrupt, because they won't give you new revelation. They won't talk about the signs that have been happening. They won't give you new revelation for the destruction that's coming and warn you of it. President Nelson shook hands with President Trump and said, "Oh, the people of China loved you." And then they gave him gifts, and they had him learn how to go shopping with a shopping cart. First time experience for Trump. So, yeah. There you go. You can do with it as you will, but the consequences will follow regardless. It's not me doing it. I'm just the messenger who's warning you.